How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me is Leonard. We wish you a happy holidays. Hope everybody out there is staying safe and healthy and doing well. This week, we decided to talk a little bit about commentators. Now, we left announcers like Mean Gene and announcers who call the talent to the ring. We left them out. We'll talk about them in another show.
Ring announcers and backstage interviewers, I think,
right,
might be a different program.
But we are going to talk about commentators, and we will go over as many as we can think of. I doubt we will touch on every single person that tried this out. So by all means, if you have comments or thoughts, or you wish we would have touched on somebody that you like, please feel free to let us know who that person is and why you feel so strongly. But we will start by just talking about what commentators bring to the matches and how important are they to the matches in the ring that we see. So, Leonard, why don't you start by talking a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I see the job as a commentator as kind of twofold. They have to get over the match in the ring to the home audience, but they also have to fill in some background, tell the different characters and storylines going on. The best announcers do that well, and the worst don't. You know, a lot of things that we've talked about in the past, like referees, we say, hey, you notice the bad ones, you don't notice the good ones. With commentators, I think you notice the really bad ones and the really good ones. It's the ones in the middle that you don't really notice or think about a whole lot.
Right.
You know, and two, I think it's important to look at the different setups and how that works, because there's the two-person setup where you have your play-by-play and your color commentator, and you have your three-person setup where that third person is an analyst. Right. And this is similar to other sports like football. Football does something very, very similar. But I think with professional wrestling, I like the two-person table much more than the three-person table.
Right.
I think with that three-person table, and you see this a lot with WWE, who went to a three-person table a few years ago, that third person, whoever that third person might be, it might be the play-by-play guy, but they wind up getting lost.
Yeah.
And they either wind up not talking a lot, or they wind up basically becoming a second color person. They're not doing the analysis. They're basically there to fight with the other guy, and it doesn't work. So I much more prefer a two-person than a three-person table. Just to say that while we're here.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. I think that commentators can make a good match great, and they can make a good match bad as well if they're not good at what they're doing. They can provide you, like you said, background information. They can offer insights into talent that you might not have known. And let's face it, they put over the talent, you know, is sometimes more so or as much as the talent are trying to put themselves over in the ring. It's really important that the commentators get over the story and provide the details on the story that's going on, and so that the viewer understands and can be engaged in what's going on in the ring. And this is how important that the commentators are. They also are supposed to be enthusiastic and passionate about the product, to the point where even the matches that might not mean anything, you think they do mean something. And I talked about this in other shows that we've done, specifically Barbarian versus Tito Santana at what was that, WrestleMania 6. And that was not a match that had any titles on the line. It was not, there was no stakes, there was no gimmicks, but they, being Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura, talked about that match as if it was really monumental. And that is something that is sorely missing today. But we will touch on that more as we talk about specific people. But yeah, I mean, as far as the booth goes, I'm not a huge fan of the 3-man booth, with the exception of AEW. I think that they do it pretty well there. Jim Ross, I guess, is technically the play-by-play guy, although I would say Excalibur has much more of a driver's seat than Jim Ross does. I think that Tony Schiavone plays his role perfectly. He chimes in when he wants, and that's about it. I don't think they talk over each other. And here's the key to the three-man booth, if it works ever: chemistry. Chemistry is the key in any commentating team, which we'll talk about later. But with a three-man booth, you really have to have chemistry, and it has to be all three of you that have that and can gel and can really work off each other well. There has to be somebody that's feeding to the other two. And if that doesn't happen adequately enough, or the guys just don't click enough, or if they're just trying to get their own shtick in, then to me, it just doesn't work and it doesn't make sense. So I much prefer the two-man booth for that reason.
And I should say the three-man booth is nothing new, because you can go back and find the early 80s WWE using that.
Right.
There was one reason I thought of to talk about announcers is I was watching some old primetime wrestling, and they had a match where the announce team was, I kid you not, Bruce Pritchard as himself, not Brother Love, Bruce Pritchard, Mike McGurk, and the Duke of Dorchester.
Yeah.
That was the table. And it was the weirdest three people that I ever remember calling the match.
Bruce Pritchard has talked about that. Basically, there wasn't anybody else, and he was told to do it with these people, and he has even said himself that he's terrible on commentary.
It wasn't great. I would actually say of the three, McGurk was doing the best job. and I have heard McGurk work with Gorilla. Actually, for some of I think she was on one or two of the Outback Jack matches that we watched for that show. But I've heard her work with Gorilla, and we'll talk more about him, so I don't go off on a tangent about Gorilla Monsoon already. And Bruno Sammartino was another guy I was watching recently, where I had watched. I think it was a couple matches in a row. I didn't know Bruno was there until he finally talked, because I think it was Vince and Jesse, and then Bruno finally said something. I was like, "Is that Bruno? That sounds like Bruno." And I didn't know it was there. I think it was another old. I got into watching old episodes of Primetime in the network, so I think it was like where they had a group of tapings together, and it was.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to touch on Bruno specifically as we go down the line. So before we do that, though, Leonard, who did you grow up with, commentating wise?
Well, so I was mid to late 80s as a kid. So that was WWE, and that was Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan were the primary team I remember. And then also Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura was probably the secondary team I remember. And I also watched a lot of NWA/WCW at the time. And that was Jim Ross was over there. Tony Schiavone was over there. I remember Gordon Soley. I remember Bob Caudle. So those are names that come up to me, and maybe because I'm biased, but those are kind of the golden age of announcing for me. Of course, I don't go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s. But those are the guys that I grew up with.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I am in the same era. I grew up with Gorilla and Jesse and Bobby Heenan and Vince McMahon. I was like, I would say 95% a WWF child. And I would check in to NWA when I could, but I didn't really get to know Jim Ross and who he was until he came to WWF and did his thing there. I certainly was aware of him, but I didn't watch NWA on a regular basis. So I pretty much grew up with those 80s commentators in WWF. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through some names here, and we're going to do them maybe not rapid fire, but we're going to offer our brief thoughts on them because there are so many names. That's why.
Yeah, I'm going to try to go as fast as possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people to talk about. So we're going to start with the play-by-play guys. Yeah. And we are going to start off with the most recent, the people that you see and hear on television today. And the first name on my list, Leonard, I'm going to let you talk about him first.
Okay.
Michael Cole.
Michael Cole has gotten better over the years, but on a 10 scale, it's like going from a 1 to a 4.
Yeah.
And my biggest problem with him is that he isn't doing anything. He is regurgitating what is being told in his ear.
Right.
And that's the worst part. And I had made a note that he does my biggest pet peeve. Him and late era WCW are the worst at this. And that is they will talk about everything except for what is in front of their face.
Yeah.
They won't talk about the match they're calling. They will talk about the main event and what happened earlier. They will talk about shit they didn't talk about to start with,
Right.
when it was on. And again, that's because that's what he's being told in his ear. So that's why I think he's so bad, is because he's got no personal investment.
Right. And I agree. And he's simply overproduced. And that's, Vince in his ear that is telling him what to say. And, there was a news bit years ago that had a list of the notes that WWE commentators today have to go over when they're doing their commentary, and it's like pages and pages of notes, and I can't imagine what it's like. And what's interesting about Michael Cole is he did one of the first women's tournaments on the WWE network, and his commentary there was actually very solid because he didn't have anybody telling him what to say. He was comfortable. He was relaxed. The brief time you saw him on camera, you could tell that he was loose and he was having fun. And you don't get that when you see him on SmackDown on Fridays. I've never enjoyed Michael Cole's commentary. It started off on a bad note for me when he took over for Jim Ross when he had one of his bouts with Bell's palsy leading into WrestleMania 15. And I don't really believe him a lot of the times when when he's trying to get over something. So yeah, I've never been a huge fan of Michael Cole, and I think it largely is what you said. He's overproduced and he is just saying what he's told to say. So we'll move on to Tom Phillips. What do you think about Tom Phillips, Leonard?
Not hugely familiar with Tom Phillips, and I think he falls into that middle ground category I mentioned, where I don't think he's great, I don't think he's terrible.
Right.
And if you just started, like, if he was on and I didn't know that was him, like, I couldn't pick him out. I couldn't pick his voice out of the lineup.
And that's the problem. That's the problem, I think, because I think today, the commentators that you see, especially the play-by-play guys, are what Vince wants to hear. He wants them to be like he was to a large extent. And they're very straightforward. They're very wooden. There's no personality.
Mm-hmm.
They just are doing what they're told to do. And they're not offering any other thoughts. They're not trying to have you get to know them in any way. And I think that's what Vince wants. And so, like you said, he's not bad. He's not great. He's just there.
Yeah.
And
he's keeping the trains
problem.
running on time. That's all he's doing.
Right. So how about one name? I didn't put it down, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Vic Joseph. You know who Joseph is?
Not very familiar with Vic. I really can't say much about him.
He falls into the same category as Phillips. He's on NXT, and he's about the same thing. He's very straightforward and very ordinary and regular on commentary. And that's, I'm not trying to knock him. He does his job, and that was about it. I mean, he's filling the shoes of Mauro Ranallo, who is, to me anyway, we can make this the next name, outstanding at what he does. And he had catchphrases. He was so knowledgeable in the talent, and I looked forward to him doing commentary. But that's me. What do you think?
I think Ronaldo had, I always read that he had heat with people backstage, and people didn't like him, and I was like, well, why? And I think it's because of what we were talking about, because he had a personality, because he was saying what he wanted to say in the way that he wanted to say it. And I don't think they didn't want someone to have a personality. And I think that was the biggest knock with him. And I think he might be the best play-by-play guy going today, because one, he can call a match, and two, you do like to listen to him. And like I said about Phillips and Joseph, I couldn't pick him out of the lineup. I can pick Ronaldo out of the lineup. He says two words. I know that's him talking.
Absolutely. And that's the way it should be. And to your point about Ronaldo, like, he has had issues with other people, and it's basically revolves around some of his well publicized mental health issues.
Yes,
And
I didn't want to go into all that, but yes,
right.
that was part of it.
And that was one of the reasons he stepped aside from his WWE duties. And I don't think that he and Vince meshed in that way, but I'm a big fan of Mauro Ranallo. Really is a shame that he's not doing it anymore. But we will move on to Jim Ross. And obviously we could probably spend a whole podcast talking about Jim Ross. In my teenage years, he was the guy. And there is a great argument to be made that he's the best ever. He is really great at what he does. Obviously, he peaked in the Attitude Era. He's still doing a good job. I still like hearing his voice on AEW. He's not nearly as streamlined or as gung-ho, maybe is the right word, as he once was. But that comes with age and the health issues that he's had. But, you could talk a lot about Jim Ross. He's one of the greatest. What do you think?
His thing is he puts a lot of passion into it. When we talked about getting over the character and the storyline, that's what he's best at. I actually don't think he's a good play-by-play guy. If it's sit there and call the match, that's not him. But if it's get over why things are happening,
right?
If it's get over who this guy is and why this guy is, he's amazing at that, and he always has been. Although I got to probably, I'm going to upset you here. I don't like him at AEW. I think he should retire because he obviously does not care about AEW at all. When I was watching it, it actually made me laugh at all the little jabs he would take about how stupid he thought everything was.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that booth should be Shivani and Excalibur, who I know we're going to talk about both those guys. But yeah, I mean, as much as great as Jim Ross was, that's a was. And I'm not knocking him as a person. I'm just saying that he should retire. And it has nothing to do with his health. I think it has to do with his investment in the product right now.
Right.
And actually, I did watch a little bit when he was calling for New Japan, and I didn't mind him on New Japan. I thought he was pretty good there because I think it was fresh to him, and he was coming to it with a fresh set of eyes. I thought he was pretty good with the New Japan commentary that I heard him do.
Yeah, I see your point about him in AEW. I think when I hear he and Shivani, it's more of a comfort to hear them.
And that's why they got hired, those guys, because it was for the nostalgic factor, 100%.
Right. I do think that his best days are behind him, and I certainly love listening to his podcast. But yeah, Excalibur is clearly the one that they're investing in long term. And they have a 3-man booth. They often invite 4 and 5 people into their booth sometimes.
Yeah, I've seen it.
But I mean, even though I don't know if he's technically play-by-play, but we could talk about him. How about we talk about Excalibur? What do you think?
Of those 3 on AEW, and this might be, get me flamed, I think Excalibur is the best right now of those 3 guys. We talked about, I listen to Jim Cornette's podcast a lot, and Jim hates Excalibur. And I think it's just because he wears a mask. I think he thinks that's stupid that he wears a mask. But if you actually listen to him, he's calling the match. He knows what the moves are. He knows who the guys are.
And he's passionate about it.
He's passionate about it.
Yeah.
I actually like the gimmick of the mask. I think it's interesting. I mean, masked wrestlers have such a rich history.
Right.
And especially over in Japan, I don't remember the name. I think there's actually been a couple, like they're in the Senate, they're in government in Japan, they wear masks, because that's what they do. They don't take them off. So, I think Excalibur's commitment to that helps to make him a character. And I think he's maybe not just the best AEW has. He may be the best going right now.
Yeah, I like him too. He has a lot of knowledge. He understands his role and does it really well. And he seems to be okay with his position next to 2 guys who have been in the business for decades.
Yeah, he gives them, all due respect and just lets them run. And I think that, again, speaks to his quality, that he knows his place, and he's living in that spot.
Right. Well, let's then talk about who's not play-by-play anymore, but he certainly was for a long time, Tony Schiavone. So I will start. I love Tony Schiavone's commentary. I really do. And I he had his good and bad moments in WCW. Towards the end, he even talks about it himself. He was really, the product was crap. And so his commentary wasn't very good at that point. But I really liked him in his short run in WWF. And to me, even though Jim Ross predated him and other more legendary commentators, to me, he was the voice of WCW. And he's the person I really found synonymous with that brand when it was at its most popular. He is, I don't know how to best to describe it. He can be very workmanlike in his play-by-play, but that was also a version of a three-man booth that I liked if you put in Heenan and Tenay. But I've always been a fan of Schiavone, so I thought it was really great when they brought him back to AEW. It was cool to see him doing those interviews. I think that's a good spot for him to provide comments here and there in commentary, to do some interviews, and just make his presence known. So what do you think about Tony Schiavone?
He's a lot better now with AEW than he was during the dying days of WCW. At one point, Schiavone was fantastic. I mean, he was a walking encyclopedia. Like, you're talking like early 90s, Sting versus Muta. He'd tell you every single match Sting versus Muta ever had.
Right.
And who won and where it was at and what day it was and what the weather was like. And I mean, he just knew it. And then as it went on, and I think, as you mentioned, because of the product in WCW, he didn't care. I don't think he cared. I think he thought it was bad, and he just couldn't put the effort in. He was very lousy towards the end of WCW. And I think it's kind of nice that AEW has given him a rebirth, has allowed him to come back. He is a lot better in this role than he was during the end of WCW. I think he likes what he's doing. He's liked that he's been given a second shot. And he does well with where he's at. And it should also be mentioned that Schiavone has done other sports. He's called baseball for a long time as well. So he's got that ability to do other sports, which I think is important to mention. He knows how it works.
I did check out some of his baseball play-by-play back when he was doing it. It was the Gwinnett Braves, and if you checked into their radio channel, you were able to hear him. So yeah, absolutely, I agree. And so let's talk about some of the gentlemen that have been in TNA. Let's start with the person they have going right now, Josh Matthews. What do you think about Josh Matthews?
I know a lot of people online don't like Josh, but I think he's okay. Now, when he's playing heel, much like when Michael Cole is heel, he's terrible. He's a 0 when he's playing heel. He's really, really bad because that's all he's doing. Not only because he's a bad heel, and 2, his focus is getting himself over.
Right.
But when he's just neutral, I think he's actually pretty good. You know, he's worked at different levels. He's been a wrestler. He's been an interviewer. He's worked backstage. So I think he's better than a lot of people give him credit for. I would take Josh Matthews over Michael Cole any day of the week. And
I'm with you there.
And I was watching TNA for a while there, and I think he's decent. And I think he's still fairly young yet. I don't remember his age, but I think he's a guy that will continue to improve. And I think having the right partner is something that is important for him.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with pretty much everything you said there. I think that he's fine at what he does. I'm glad that he has work as a play-by-play guy in TNA. And I think to your point about people not liking him, I think that stems from a lot of his social media activity. He has made comments over the years about Jim Ross, and that will never get you in the good graces of fans.
Right.
And I think that he comes across as somewhat of a jerk in some of his social media accounts. Who knows if that's what he's like in real life, or to your point, maybe he's just trying to play a heel. But I agree. I think that he's fine, and he only has room to improve. So, yeah, absolutely. And the person that was play-by-play before this was Mike Tenay. And Mike Tenay, as a play-by-play guy, is nowhere near as good as Mike Tenay as an analyst or a color commentator. And Eric Bischoff talks a lot about this on his podcast, 83 Weeks, about how great Mike Tenay was in his role with WCW and Shivani and Bobby Heenan, and how he really just doesn't like his play-by-play in TNA because he would listen to Tenay and Taz and say, you have two guys doing color. And there is a point to be made there. He's not the worst I've ever heard, but I think his more comfortable position is as an analyst or a color who's providing those crazy encyclopedic details that you don't think about or even know. But what did you think about Mike Tenay as play-by-play?
I was going to mention the Eric Bischoff stuff because I recently listened to one where he talked about that.
Right.
And he's 100% right. Tenay would be brought in for special matches like the luchador stuff and get that over in WCW. And it made those matches seem special,
right?
Seem really different and unique because it's like we have to bring in this different guy, and he was fantastic at that. I've mentioned before how I do fantasy wrestling, drafting rosters, booking shows. A lot of times you have to draft commentators, and I'm always surprised how low Mike Tenay goes, or he doesn't go at all. And I think it's because people think of him as a play-by-play dude from TNA. Where, as you said, he wasn't great. And it wasn't until I listened to Bischoff that I went, oh, yeah, like he's right. And if you compare him in TNA to him in WCW, it is a huge world of difference. I really like Mike Tenay, and I think he's underrated because I think most people don't know him in his natural position.
Right. So let's get a little bit off the beaten path here. Let's talk about Kevin Kelly, who is the play-by-play guy for Ring of Honor. Now, Leonard, I don't know how much of his commentary you've heard. He also does stuff in Japan as well. So you might have heard his stuff there. But I think Kevin Kelly, obviously most people know him for his backstage interviews with WWF. And I think that he does a good job on play-by-play, actually. There's another guy that I would take over Michael Cole. And, we're doing a lot of Michael Cole bashing, but he obviously is good at what he does, and Vince likes him. So even though we might not be fans of him, hats off to him for keeping a job as long as he has. But on the Kevin Kelly note, I think Kevin Kelly is really good, and a lot of people probably don't hear his stuff, but he does a good job and is knowledgeable.
Yeah, I was watching Ring of Honor for a while, and again, for me, he kind of falls into that middle territory where I didn't think he was. I would put him above Vic Joseph and Tom Phillips, who we mentioned. But again, to me, he was kind of nondescript, but I think he was knowledgeable, and I think he had good chemistry because they rotated color guys a lot in Ring of Honor. Yeah. And it seemed like every week it was a new color guy sitting with him, and he was able to pick up with whoever it was that he was with. So I think that's a very good skill to have for a commentator. You can partner with just about anyone. So from what I've seen of Kevin Kelly, I would say his number one skill is being able to work with a variety of people.
Yeah. So on a side note, Leonard, do you remember the singlet that Michael Cole wore in some of his matches?
Yes.
Like that might find its way under your Christmas tree.
Oh, I got it. I hope not. But I will be ecstatic if it does. I will.
You'll feign excitement.
I will feign excitement. I will build a shadow box for it.
Maybe I'll just get you a Vic Joseph t-shirt. What do you think?
Either or.
All right. Well, let's move on to Vince McMahon himself. We would hear Vince McMahon on sporadic pay-per-views, obviously, but a lot on TV as well with Jesse Ventura. I liked Vince McMahon because even though he probably wants something different out of his commentators today and produces in a certain way, when he was on commentary himself, it was all in his hands. So he was passionate about the product. There were little Vince McMahon-isms on commentary that we can joke about today, but that made him memorable. And I thought that he was good. It was one of the highlights was when Jesse Ventura came back to host Raw and demanded that Vince get on commentary with him for the main event or whatever, close to the main event match. And they did like one match. It was Sheamus and somebody else. I forget who it was, but it was Jesse and Vince on commentary. And that was really great. I remember Jesse Ventura talking about why doesn't Sheamus go out into the sun? But anyway, what did you think about Vince?
He's very passionate when he was on commentary. He was loud. I know a lot of people give him crap for what a maneuver because he didn't know something.
Yeah.
But I think Vince maybe cast himself poorly as being a play-by-play guy. He may have been better just as a color guy. I think he was always fun. I think he was notable. He's got a very strong and notable voice. I think he does work better as a personality, as like the Mr. McMahon character.
Oh yeah, 100%.
For the period where he was working as a play-by-play man, I think he was fine because it was his product, and he knew what he wanted his product to be, and so he was able to do that.
No, absolutely. He often didn't feed to the heel color guys as much as a Jim Ross or a Tony Schiavone would. He would have his own agenda, and he would certainly talk with them, but he was much more rigid and, moving forward with whatever he wanted to do himself when he was a play-by-play guy. So let's move on to Gorilla Monsoon. And Gorilla Monsoon, if you were a fan of wrestling in the 80s, you heard Gorilla Monsoon on commentary. And to me, he is one of the greatest. I really do miss his commentary for so many reasons. And it's funny when you listen to Bruce Pritchard talks about how Gorilla Monsoon would always need to know everything that happened in the match. And like you could hear the foreshadowing sometimes when you would listen to Gorilla's play-by-play. But I thought Gorilla Monsoon was really, really great because it was his personality. He had so many catchphrases and terms that only Gorilla used. You knew his voice right away. And he would criticize, and this is key, criticize the talent a lot of times, even if they were a face. Mm-hmm. If they were doing something in the ring that he didn't think made sense, he would call them out on it. And boy, is that surely lacking today. Like, if you had commentators that were honest about what was going on instead of like, oh, we got to put him over, we can't, trash him, we can't do this, we can't do that, just call the match. Like, Gorilla was great at that, and he really worked off of his color commentators well. To me, he's one of the best. What did you think?
I know we're going to talk about like teams right at the very end real quick, but to be on one of the greatest teams, commentating teams of all time, is tough. Gorilla is arguably twice with Bobby Heenan and Jesse Ventura, who we're going to talk about. And he had unique chemistry with both those guys. And one thing that Gorilla did that no one does anymore is he makes things make sense.
Right.
I was recently watching WrestleMania 6 when we were watching when we were doing the Tito Santana episode. I watched the more WrestleMania 6, specifically the infamous Bad News Brown versus Roddy Piper. WrestleMania 7. I'm sorry, WrestleMania 7.
Right.
It was Roddy Piper versus Bad News Brown, where Piper painted himself half black, and Piper pulls out a fingerless glove, white, as opposed to Bad News Brown's black glove. And he starts hitting with it. And Ventura's like, why is the referee letting that go? Why is that glove could be loaded? What's happening here? And Gorilla was like, well, he must have checked it in the back. He must have checked it in the locker room before he came out, so he knew it was okay.
Right.
Like, he explained it. Nobody, they would have ignored that today.
Absolutely.
They would have either ignored it, or if someone would have said, oh, why is he letting him do that? They would just went, eh.
Right.
And Gorilla is another one, real quick, I'll mention, is I was watching a house show from Madison Square Garden in 1982. And it was Bob Backlund versus Billy Graham, lumberjack match, special guest referee Swede Hansen. And it's Vince and Gorilla on commentary. And Swede is fast counting for Billy Graham. And Vince is losing his mind. And Monsoon is like, we don't know. He's counting fast, yes, but we don't know if that's consistent. Because Backlund hasn't got a pin yet. He's not a trained referee. So that could just be he counts fast. We have to wait. So the fact that Monsoon was like, yeah, that's a fast count, but if he counts that fast for Backlund, then it's fine.
Right.
Nobody does that anymore. And again, we could talk an entire show about Gorilla. I know we're trying to kind of rapid fire these, so I won't say any more about Gorilla other than you don't get much better.
absolutely. And as usual, when we say we're going to go quick, we don't. But that's all
I
right.
know. I'm trying.
No, I was trying too. So let's move on to some of the older guys in the business here. Um, we'll try and, you know what? Actually, before we get to those, we didn't mention Joey Styles.
Okay.
And I did not watch a lot of ECW, but I'm certainly familiar with Joey Styles' commentary. I've seen enough of it in ECW, and certainly what he did with WWE. I like Joey Styles a lot. I think that he had a memorable voice. He also had his own catchphrases that he would get over, and he was also low-key very knowledgeable about the business and the talent in the ring. To me, he did a really good job. I think it was almost a disservice to have him be on his own in ECW at times. I think like he works good with somebody else, but I always like Joey Styles. What do you think?
Actually, I was going to say, I think he's a rarity that he works well by himself. I think, and he worked very well for the ECW product. I didn't like him as well in WWE because I think it was a different product, and I think it's because they paired him with different people.
Right.
But for that company at that point in time, he was probably the best voice for them. And
Yeah.
sometimes you get that. You just get a guy that fits a certain niche, and I think that was Joey. I do think he's very knowledgeable. I know he's done other things in the business behind the scenes. Yeah, I mean, he's the voice of ECW, and to have that on his resume, I think is perfect enough for him and what he meant to the business.
So we'll talk about the last three names here. We'll just kind of loop them all into one, even though they probably deserve their own podcasts and their own shows, I should say.
Sure.
So we'll talk about Bob Caudle, Gordon Soley, and Lance Russell. And Lance Russell is most famous from being AWA, of course, and he had a really memorable voice. He was whenever AWA, I keep wanting to say AEW, but it's AWA. Whenever they would be on TV, it was always at weird times in my neighborhoods, but whenever they were on TV, he was excellent at what he did. I can't say that I watched enough of it to really be super knowledgeable about him, but I'm certainly aware of how iconic he is in terms of a commentator, and he was really great at what he did. He had a really distinct voice, and he was the AWA guy, even though he worked for other companies, obviously.
Yeah,
But,
he of course worked for Memphis a lot, and he worked for Smoky Mountain. And I know Jim Cornette said that he specifically brought Lance Russell in to give the company a little weight, a little gravitas. Again, I haven't heard a lot of Lance Russell, but I think he's excellent.
Yeah, and as far as Bob Caudle goes, now I'm more familiar with Bob Caudle now because I listen to Jim Ross's podcast, and he talks a lot about his relationship with Bob Caudle, and
they
watch
worked a lot
those events.
in W together.
Right, and that's how I know Bob Caudle. I listened, and he was an older man by that point, but he seems to be good. And Gordon Soley obviously is a legend and worked for many different companies, NWA being the most notable. But again, with somebody like that, you could say so much. I think when you get into some of these older gentlemen, they have a much more slower, deliberate style of play-by-play. And being that that's not what I grew up with totally, it's tough sometimes for me to go back and watch those matches. But they made their impact and well-deserved. So what do you think about those two?
Caudle, I think, is underrated today because he's older and because I've seen him do play-by-play and color, and he's good at both.
Right.
And it's rare to have a guy good at both. And then Gordon Soley, of course, is considered the dean of commentary. And his strength he was probably the best at calling a match. You know, when I said that Jim Ross was the best at emotion, but not so great at calling the match, Soley wasn't so great at emotion, but he was brilliant in calling a match and getting it over. And I loved how he called a suplex a supplé because he was making it French.
Right.
And different things. And actually, I got to know Solely a little bit through Championship Wrestling from Florida. I found a bunch of DVDs of those and bought those and watched those. and that's where I really heard his voice a lot. And Sully was a guy who worked by himself. We talked about Joey Styles.
True, yeah.
He was paired with a lot of guys, but Sully worked by himself a lot and was very good at working by himself. So again, another guy that could work in a pair, could work by himself. I've seen Sully and Cottle work together, and it's fantastic. But I have a soft spot for those older guys.
Yeah, he was very flexible, and so was both he and Bob Cottle were. They were very flexible. They could pretty much do whatever was asked of them, and do it really well. So, let's move on to the color commentators. Now, this is a much shorter list because obviously, if you counted every person that's done color over the years, the list could be endless. But we're just going to hit on some of the major names. We'll start off by somebody who's doing it right now, which is Samoa Joe. And I have to say, it almost made me mad when I heard him do it because he's good at it. He's really, really good at it.
Yeah.
But I want to see him in the ring. Now, I don't know obviously he's been around for a long time. So whatever injuries are plaguing him, obviously it's something pretty serious if he's staying out of the ring. But he's really good at his role as a heel color commentator. And unless Vince just gets tired of him, I would imagine he has a good spot there for a while. But what do you think, Samoa Joe?
I was surprised when I first heard him in color because I don't necessarily consider him a great promo. I mean, he gets over what he needs to in his style, but he's fantastic. And he reminds me very much of the older school color and play-by-play guys that we were talking about. The fact that he gets people over, he gets the storyline over while also analyzing what's happening. He is probably too good for who he's working with.
I agree. I agree. Yep.
But I was very surprised. And again, love Joe in the ring. Would love to see more of Joe in the ring. But if this is the it for him, then, and again, much like Gorilla Monsoon, if you go back and watch Gorilla as a wrestler, big burly guy, you wouldn't think he was eloquent as he was.
Right.
Joe is very much in the Monsoon mold.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about Corey Graves. And I don't know that we'll agree on this, Leonard. I don't really know what your thoughts are on Corey Graves, but you know what? I'm going to let you go first before I give my opinion.
I like Corey Graves. I don't think he's as good now as he used to be when he was in NXT because I think they let him just go a little bit. And now he's more in that a guy in his ear telling him what to do and what to say. I also think he leans a little towards being too heelish at times, and he kind of forgets what he's doing, and he leans into the character too much. And but in some respects, I do think he reminds me of an older commentator. In fact, that he's got people he likes and he's got people he doesn't like, and that doesn't change even when someone turns heel from heel to face or face to heel or whatever. If he didn't like them to start with, he doesn't like them now. And he tries to work that into his character. So I really do like Corey Graves. I know some people do and some people don't.
You know what? I agree with your points on how he was a little bit different in NXT, and they were allowing him a little bit more room to maneuver when he was doing it there. But to me, he's probably the best color guy in the business right now, and certainly the best that WWE has. I just don't think he has found his gorilla, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. He hasn't found the perfect person to play off of.
And if he would, then I think it would be one of those iconic duos in the booth. But
here's what you do: you'd move Joe to play-by-play and put him with Graves at color and see what that looks like.
That would be interesting. That would be interesting. But yeah, Corey Graves is really good, and I agree also when he leans into the character too much sometimes. But yeah, he's always entertaining to listen to. So let's also then talk. We already talked about Excalibur, but let's also talk about Taz. And to me, Taz was Michael Cole's best partner, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think Michael Cole was ever as good as he was when Taz was his color guy. To me, they worked really well off of each other, and I don't think that Michael Cole has found somebody that works that well with him since. Now, maybe it's because being that they're both on Fox, he and Corey Graves, I should say, they're probably produced to the nth degree by whoever's in their ear. But I always thought Taz did a good job. He was heelish when he needed to be, but he wasn't over the top with it. And I think that's what made he and Michael Cole work really well together, because sometimes they would agree, other times they wouldn't. And he would Taz would lean more on the heel side of things. But even when Taz is on AEW now, he's pretty good at going back to what he was in WWE, and obviously he was in TNA as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he did a good job.
I think a lot of people kind of make fun of Taz because he says funny things or weird things. Like the throwing soup bones, Cole. Like he's very much like Dusty Rhodes in the fact, like, they'd be Clubber and Tony. Like he's got those little idiosyncrasies to it. But I do agree. I really like Taz, and I think Taz was another guy who worked well off of different partners. Definitely was Cole's best partner. I just think it's because he does have a weird speech pattern. I think people get on him.
I like that.
But yeah, I think it makes him unique, and I do think he was good.
Right. So let's move on to Jerry Lawler. And I want to say early in Jerry Lawler's run, when he was with Vince, he was too heelish to me.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, it goes without saying that when he and JR were paired together, they were one of the iconic commentary duos. And he would sometimes overplay the puppies and the stuff like that. But at the same time, you loved him for it. And famously, Jim Ross talks about how Vince would never talk to Jerry Lawler in the headset, but he would like produce JR, all the time, and would shout stuff at him. But Jerry Lawler said he rarely ever got any notes from Vince in the headset. So, but yeah, Lawler, he was good at what he did, and there's not much more you could say. He's great.
He was good for the era. He was good playing off of Jim Ross. I think he was a little too cartoony and over the top, but that's what worked for that period of time. And when you look a little bit later, when he's been more stoic and not screaming about puppies, he's actually kind of boring.
I agree.
Solid, but he's boring. So again, if we talk about time, place, partner, Jerry Lawler is certainly one of those guys that fit a certain time, a certain place, and with a certain partner.
Absolutely agree. And yeah, like we were saying, chemistry, and you said time and place are key in these things. And for the Attitude Era, he was the guy. So let's move on to Jesse Ventura. To me, Jesse Ventura and Bobby Heenan, and we could kind of loop them together.
Let's do both here.
To me, they are the best color guys of all time. Jesse brought something different to the table than Bobby Heenan did. Bobby Heenan brought a lot of comedy. Jesse Ventura was like the definition of a devil's advocate color commentator. He would argue the heel's case better than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, period, anybody. He was great with Gorilla, great with Vince McMahon, and just so passionate in his role. I do miss him on the mic. What do you think?
And one thing about Jesse, he wasn't always heel. Like if the face did something that made sense, he would admit it. If the face, if he said, you know what, this guy's actually a good wrestler, he would admit that. And something similar to him and Bobby Heenan, even though the styles are different, is that the more they hated somebody, the more you liked them. We talked about, our video with Tito Santana and his WrestleMania matches. Tito was over because of how bad Ventura and Heenan ragged on him.
Right.
The more they ragged on him, the more you cheered for him.
Right. True.
They both had that element to them. Again, Heenan was much more humorous. You could go on forever on some of Heenan's best lines. Some of the Royal Rumble, is it 92 where Flair wins? Is considered, one of the best commentary of all time of any match.
Yeah.
Of what they do on that, Monsoon and Heenan. Heenan's my all-time favorite commentator. I think he's great. Ventura was great. And again, Heenan wasn't so solid later on in WCW because him and Tony Schiavone didn't get along.
I agree.
Talked about that. Ventura wasn't so hot when he went to WCW, but he was just kind of there to get the money. I know Heenan liked working with Mike Tenay, who we talked about, and some of the other guys over there. So Heenan actually enjoyed being on the C show a lot better than being with Shivani. Again, you talk about time and place. I think both those guys are perfect for where they were in WWF, especially if you compare to what they did in WCW. But yeah, again, two of the best all time, and they do have more similarities and differences.
Yeah, no, and Heenan is one of the greatest. His commentary in WWF is so great, and even in some of his early days in WCW, I was laughing because I'm remembering the King of the Road match with Dustin Rhodes, where they're in the back of the pickup truck, and his commentary is really great in that match in particular. But you were talking about Jesse Ventura in WCW. He said in his interviews the only commentator he couldn't work with was Jim Ross, and Jim Ross admitted that he wouldn't put Jesse over or really react. It's almost cringeworthy. Once you hear Jim Ross talk about it, when you go back and then watch those events, it is tough to listen to because Jesse would make jokes and like say stuff to Jim Ross and he would just be ignored. But it was basically because Jesse Ventura was getting paid a lot more money than Jim Ross, and that's pretty much all it mattered, all it boiled down to. But again, that's time and place.
Yeah.
So let's talk about we'll loop these two guys together. Let's talk about Byron Saxton and Coach.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Saxton, I think, is too weak and too much of a milquetoast in either, I don't know, in real life or his character, because he always gets bitched at and then takes it. And that doesn't make a fun character. That doesn't make him somebody that you want to hear. And I don't think he's strong. I would call him maybe one of the weakest people working today. Coach is someone who got better as he went along.
Yeah.
As he kind of figured out. And again, he was someone, when he was playing heel and leading into the Coach character, it got bad. When he's just him, and of course he's gone on to do other things in sports as well, and has worked for ESPN. And I think actually when he's come back to do a couple special things, he's been better because he's coming back as this veneer of I'm a legit sportscaster now.
Right.
And I think that actually makes him better than trying to play the Coach character. And I think he's better as an interviewer than he ever was on the table.
Right. No, I would agree. I'm not a big fan of Byron Saxton either. I do think his character is generally pretty weak. And again, it's a matter of, do I believe the person I'm listening to? And I don't always believe it with Byron Saxton. Mm-hmm. And Coach, he has his good moments and he has his bad moments. There's times when he was a heel that I enjoyed listening to him. And there's other times where, like you said, he hammered the point home too much. And, but I generally, I thought Coach was okay. The 3-man booth that he had with Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, it wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't necessary because the two of them were so iconic.
Yeah, he got lost in that booth. He was of the 3-man in that booth, he was the guy that got lost.
Right, I agree. But yeah, so let's talk about JBL quickly. JBL was okay as a heel color guy. There were times it's tough to go back and listen to some of that stuff now because he would play the bully role to me too hard sometimes. And I didn't always enjoy listening to it, but he was passable. That's my one word answer there.
The JBL character I always described as Ted DiBiase meets J.R. Ewing.
Yeah.
And he played that as a wrestler and he played that on the commentary table. I was surprised about how good he was when he started. And I think he's someone who, as opposed to some of these other guys we talked about, I think he got worse as he went along. Because I don't know if he was leaning into the character too much or he decided he didn't like being on the desk or what. I really liked when he started because he felt like a throwback. We hadn't seen really a straight up heel commentator for a long time. He was injecting humor like Heenan used to do. I really liked him to start with, but I do think he went downhill over the years, and he probably got off the commentary position at a good time.
Yeah. So let's just mention a few names that we maybe forgot to mention. If there's any thoughts you have, Leonard, we could mention Mark Madden. or Dusty Rhodes or Scott Hudson. All of those guys were around for good chunks of time. Dusty Rhodes is a legend. Don't like him on the booth. I'll be honest with you. I don't like. There's times that he's fun. Don't get me wrong.
He's fun. He's fun as hell. And on the list you sent me, Don West is on there, and Don West is fun as hell. He's not good, but he's fun as hell because he sells everything.
Right.
Like he not only is he selling what's happening in the ring, but he's selling you the guy's T-shirt at the same time. He's excellent.
Don West. He verges on one of those channel changer guys.
I love Don West because he's bad. I love him because he's bad. He's so good. He's bad.
If he's selling me T-shirts, I think that's fun and I want to hear it.
Yeah.
But when I have to hear him on color all the time, to me, it's like, oh God, you need to tone it down just a few notches.
And of course, he used to do the Home Shopping Network.
Yeah.
2 a.m. Jim Mint 10, Michael Jordan rookie cards.
Jim Mint 10.
Love that stuff. But Dusty's the same way. He's really, really fun. He's got catchphrases like "They be Culber and Tony," and "There's a woman in the guy's bathroom."
Yeah, that's a good one.
And the Nasty Boys just got out the Kmart 100-foot extension cord. and again, Dusty is bad, but he's fun bad.
Yes.
And that's what I liked about him. I'm trying to think who else you mentioned here real quick.
Oh, we didn't mention Paul Heyman.
Paul Heyman's good. I like
Paul Heyman was really good, especially with Jim Ross during the time that Lawler wasn't there. I thought that they were really great.
I would say next to Lawler, Heyman was probably Ross's best partner.
Yeah.
I think he's very good. A name I don't think you have down here is Jim Cornette. I know Jim got a lot of flack for when he was NWA, last gig he did, and the joke that he made. But especially for the NWA, he was perfect for that because that's his style, that's his era, that's his niche.
Yeah.
I do like Jim Cornette on commentary. He's a better manager. I think most managers make good commentators because they're used to talking and they're used to putting guys over. So I do like Jim a lot. Although I admit he's not great, but I do like Jim a lot. You've got Roddy Piper down here.
Yeah.
Piper was. I've heard Bruce Pritchard talk about one time, but Piper had done commentary, I think they said in Portland, and they liked it, and it was good. But then when they put him on the desk in WWF, I almost said EF, which we interchange it, that they wanted him to play the character, the Piper, the Mad Scotsman character. And I think that made him too wild and too crazy. And, of course, the most notable thing for him was when they made Tony Atlas Saba Simba. And he's like, it's just Tony Atlas. Right. And he killed the character out of the gate. I think that's one of his more famous things on commentary.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of Roddy Piper on color. I think that if you go back and it's been played all the time lately, The Undertaker's debut, I really think that there was what he added to his entrance was almost too goofy. Mm-hmm. To me, I think you could have made that much more of an ominous debut than even what it was. And of the time, it was even shocking. But when it's funny, but it's like, when he comes out, he's like, look at the size of that ham hock.
Yeah.
and then when he takes his hat off, he's like, he needs a little night time there, pal. It's funny, but I wouldn't think that that's what they were going for.
He was trying to be too funny, I think.
Right.
And Randy Savage is another guy who I think played too much of the character when he was on the table.
Yeah, he was.
I think I've joked that the worst 3-man table ever would be Savage, Rhodes, and Piper.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that would sound like.
It's just them all doing their own shit and not paying attention to anything happening is what that would be.
Yeah.
Oh, Mark Mann, Scott Hudson, you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
I was surprised. I never thought much about them until Eric Bischoff talked about them on his podcast and how he really likes them both and thought they were both excellent. And now I'm going to go back and listen to some of them because I never thought they were particularly good or thought much about them. So I would be really interested in going back and listening to some stuff now after I've heard the framework that Bischoff's given me on them.
Yeah, again, and like Mark Madden in small doses, I thought he was okay, but again, the product was not good then. Scott Hudson, I thought was fine. To me, he fits into that Tom Phillips, Vic Joseph category. He's fine, but not great, not terrible. But you mentioned, and I can't believe I forgot it, Eric Bischoff. Even though he's a play-by-play guy, As a character, Eric Bischoff was great. As a play-by-play guy, not my fave.
No, and I think he admits that. You know, he talks
Yeah.
about how he first got into business with the AWA was he was doing interviews because the regular dude was drunk and he was the only guy with a suit. You know,
Right.
he never meant to be on camera, and I think he filled that role because he had to. And I think he's the first one to admit, yeah, I wasn't great. He did it because he had to, and I think he was fine. I think he falls into the Vince McMahon role, and where it was his product to a degree, so he knew what he wanted with it and how to get it over. And I think he was passionate about the product to a degree. And that's where Bischoff would fall for me. And again, there's tons of other guys. Real quick, a name that you had that we haven't talked about yet is Larry Zbyszko. I like Larry a lot on commentary.
Yeah, as did I.
Because I think he again was on like B and C shows for WCW and not a great period, but he was very good at walking that line between being kind of the funny heel and getting over the product the way he needed to get it over. I like Larry a lot.
Right. No, I do too. I thought he was fine. So we'll do we'll try this again. We'll try rapid fire answers here. We'll do one word answers and see if we can do it. Okay. So Leonard, best play-by-play right now. First name that comes to mind.
Like I want to say Excalibur. Even
right. I would accept that. I would accept that. Of all time.
Of all time, Gorilla Monsoon.
I will agree with you about Excalibur and Gorilla. You know what? Of all time, I'm going to have to go Jim Ross.
Okay.
Best color commentator right now.
Can I say Excalibur again? No, I'll go Joe. I'll go Samoa Joe.
Samoa Joe. I'm going to go Corey Graves there. So best color commentator of all time.
Bobby Heenan with the asterisks of being with Gorilla.
I would go with Bobby Heenan as well on color. Best team right now.
Best team right now? Oh, I don't know who I would even give that to. You know, one guy who we didn't talk about is Josh Matthews' partner is Don Callis.
Oh, true.
And you know what? I'm gonna go out on a limb, way to the left field, and I'm gonna say Matthews and Callis.
All right. So best
because
team.
I don't like anybody else. It's almost the best of a bad lot.
Best team of all time.
I gotta go Monsoon and Heenan, with Monsoon and Ventura being a very close second.
I'll say, interesting, because my answers are different individually than they are as a team. So best team right now, I'm gonna go with AEW of Shivani, Ross, and Excalibur. I think they work generally pretty well together. Of all time, I gotta go with Gorilla and Jesse Ventura. Actually, close second would be Gorilla and Bobby Heenan. But if you asked me, if you could bring a team back right now to replace a team that's currently going, who would you bring back? I would pick Gorilla and Jesse Ventura because they bring a legitimacy to the product. But
I would agree with you there. I think they would get over the product better and in a different way than what Monsoon and Heenan would. So yeah, if it was like pull someone from the past that could help you out now, and some of the older guys we talked about, like Bob Caudell or Goran Soli, because again, I think some of that weight, that seriousness, that gravitas, talking about the match in front of your face and not everything else is what's sorely lacking. And guys like that and Lance Russell, who we talked about, fall into that category.
So in terms of how commentary is, one word answer here. Do you like it to be produced or not produced?
Not produced.
I would agree with you there. So we have talked about as many names as we can think of.
And there's a lot that we left off.
But we probably can't go any longer here. Please let us know if there's any names you wish we would have talked about.
Maybe we'll do a part 2. And again, we are looking to talk about ring announcers and backstage interviewers at a different time.
Absolutely. And that should be a fun one as well. For Leonard, my name is Chad. Hopefully everybody's having happy holidays, and we will see you next time.